So I'm live now. Okay, great. Before I forget, this is a book I think you'll love. I really, really loved it. Yeah. Okay. All right, I think it's time to get started. Can everyone hear me? Thank you all for coming. As you know, I spent 5 days at a workshop on a small island off the coast of Connecticut a couple of weeks ago called Essentials of Iconography. And it was an amazing time. I must say I worked far harder than I thought I was going to. Because, I've been to a lot of retreats and workshops, and you always get like a couple hours in the afternoon, just to relax. And we went straight from 9 in the morning until 8 in the evening, with a couple breaks for meals, short breaks, during which we talked the whole time. So it was very intense and really memorable. And I will show you the icon that came out of it. But first, I want to talk to you about the background of icons, to try to understand more about this work of spiritual devotion that really is, it comes from the East. It comes from Eastern Orthodoxy. And so it can seem, I think, strange and intimidating sometimes. And so I am giving you really a summary of what my teacher gave us over the course of 5 days. And I'll talk some more about him. Okay. I have some cheat notes there, but basically I'm just going to talk. Okay. So about 15 years ago, I became sort of interested in icons. And there was one image in particular that I really, really liked. And it's this one. This one right here that you can see. Some of these are public domain images off the web, so they're not the best often. Anyway, I bought a copy of this. And then, maybe 5 years later, I read somewhere that every icon has a feast day associated with it. So I thought, and every icon is named, too. And so I looked it up, and the feast day of this icon is my birthday. Wow. Now, I have to tell you, there are 3 feast days associated with this icon. But it's still a very odd piece of serendipity. And the 3 feast days have to do with important things that happen to this icon. One, it's a Russian icon. It's called the Vladimir Theotokos, bearer of God. And there are various miracles associated with it. And so the feast days have to do with that. So that was sort of my introduction to icons. Tell you just a little bit about where I was. As I think you know, on the last Wednesday of the month at our Soul weekends, I'm going to be talking about the process of creating an icon. So I'm going to try to separate my remarks, and hopefully you'll come back for that as well. But I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview. Ender's Island is a little 10-acre island. It's reached by a causeway off the coast of Mystic, Connecticut. So it is in Long Island Sound, essentially. There was a wealthy couple who had an estate there, and when they were nearing the end of their lives, they donated it to the Catholic Church. And it became St. Edmund's Retreat on Ender's Island. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful place. They have 2 main missions there. One is to run recovery programs for people who are dealing with addictions, trauma, etc. But then they also have the Institute of Sacred Art. And so they offer iconography, calligraphy, Gregorian chant, etc. They bring in teachers. They don't have a staff of teachers. And obviously, I did iconography. They have a beautiful chapel there that is filled with beautiful art. I'll show some more pictures of that at the end of the month. And it's surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. And as a landlocked Iowan who just happened to be born in Iowa, excuse me, instead of by the water where I should have been born, It was wonderful to be near the sea. This was our studio. There were eight of us. And this is the former chapel of the estate. And they have repurposed it into a really lovely art studio. And this was my teacher, Marek Zarzinski, who is one of the top iconographers in the United States. I really came to appreciate him. And I want to tell you just a little bit about his story because I think it really applies to what we're talking about. So Marek is Polish-American, grew up in a family. His parents were both immigrants, came to the United States in 1950 after suffering really terrible privations and difficulties during World War II in Poland. He was a bit of a rebel and he grew up in a very heavily Catholic family, very heavily Polish Catholic family, and then was a rebel in college and then decided to go to art school. And he was in art school and he went home for a visit one day and his father told him that the church was wanting to get an icon of Our Lady of Częstochowa. I think that's how it's pronounced, which is the great icon of Poland. Oops, I'll show you a picture of it in a minute. And Marek's father said, well, my son is in art school and he can do that for you. And so his father came to Marek and said, you need to do an icon for the church. And he said, I don't know icon painting. I know it's really complicated. I'm just a beginning artist. I can't do that. And he said, and his dad said, well, I promised Father. And so, the Catholic Guild. And so Marek created an icon of Our Lady of Częstochowa. And he said it wasn't very good, but the church was pleased with it. But it got him interested in the art of icon painting. And so that was really the beginning for him. And then as an addendum, he told the story of years later, after he spent 3 decades learning really how to paint icons. He went back to the church, different priest at this point, and he said, you know, the icon that I made for you is really not very good. And I would like to, free of charge, give you a really wonderful replica. And they said, absolutely not. You know, that this icon had been prayed with for 3 decades. It was infused with the spirit of the parish, and there was no way that they were going to give it up. So you can see that the icon, we worked on a single icon the entire week. This is the image. It has some marks on it from what we were following. It's a 14th century image of St. Michael the Archangel. It was painted in Constantinople, now Istanbul, in the 14th century. And Marek said angels are really good to start on because we don't have as strong associations with what angels look like. They're often simpler than saints and holy figures. And so he often starts people on angels. And I'll go into all the long process of what we did on Wednesday. This is Our Lady of Częstochowa. One of the interesting things to me about the workshop was all the conversations that we had about the very complicated, tangled relationship between Catholicism and Orthodoxy, especially from someone who was Polish-American, who had studied with a Russian iconographer for decades. And in Poland, even though they have this icon, it's a somewhat problematic relationship to icons because they're so associated with Russia. And so it was interesting to hear all the permutations of that. But I wanted to show this to you. This is the original icon, if you went to see it, would look much more damaged than this. And so this is a copy of it. But all the copies include the marks, the slash on her face, which was done in the 1400s by a soldier who was trying to destroy it. And the story is that even if you create a replica, that the slashes still come through because she is an image of sorrow as well as of holiness. So but it shows a number of the characteristics of icons that I'll be talking about later.
That's not the one he did.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, he didn't show us a picture of that. So on our first evening, he gave us an hour lecture on talking about the difference between religious art and iconography. And he showed this image, so you might recognize it. It's only recently attributed to Leonardo da Vinci. It's called the Salvator Mundi, I believe, Savior of the World. In many ways, it has some of the characteristics of an icon, especially if you compare it with this, for example. But in all sorts of ways, this is not an icon. This is a representation of an individual artist, of his vision. And it lacks a halo, which icons always have. It lacks some of the other symbolism that icons often have. And the perspective is the perspective of a painting rather than an icon. And I'll tell you more about that. And so icons are religious art, but not all religious art are icons. This is one of the most famous icons. I have a copy of it down there. It's the Holy Trinity. We are fortunate to have some icons up here. Mel Schlachter has a nice collection, and so this sometimes is up in our church. It was painted by Rublev, one of the great iconographers of Russia. And it shows some of the classic characteristics. Again, this is a poor copy. You can see better down there. So the halos, this sort of odd perspective, and it's called inverse or reverse perspective, meaning when we look at an icon, we are not expecting to see a representational work of art. Instead, it is a window into the divine realm. And because of that, it's deliberately shifted in perspective so that you can see far more of people and images than you could otherwise. And sometimes this is more obvious than others, but if you see icons that have really weird building shapes, that's done deliberately. It's not that they didn't know about the laws of perspective in art, it's that icons follow their own language.
So is that painting back there, is that an icon then too?
Yes, it is. It is. And I actually have one that's somewhat similar to that I'll talk about. So when we think about icons, I think often about old icons. And this is a really early icon. These icons are often really damaged. And I think that, Marek told the story of his teacher, who was a famous Russian iconographer. A dealer once came to her house and was trying to see if he could sell any of her icons. And he came away really disappointed because he said she didn't have icons there. You know, she had new paintings, you know, and he thought an icon was like this, you know, something that had history and age and damage. And so icons have, they're both old and they're new. So this is an example of this. The scene is the same as the icon that we have behind our altar. It's of Christ bringing the dead out of hell after he was raised. This is an example of an icon that has been copied, renewed, and so freshened up. And so the original icon of this would probably show a lot more damage. Icons are often done on wood with egg tempera paint, but not necessarily. There are fresco icons, there are mosaic icons, and the definition really has to do with the symbols that are used and the way in which they are approached devotionally. This, I think, actually is a fresco, now that I think about it. Oh, I'm going to hold Marilyn. Okay. I'll tell you, yeah, okay, this is my signal just to talk more about the theology. Okay, so icons are not an artistic style, they're a form of spirituality. Our teacher made that very, very clear. So they're windows into heaven, and they're an attempt to try to convey the invisible. So think of all the ways in which we believe in things visible and invisible, that so much of the divine really can't be expressed easily. So that's what an icon tries to do, is try to present theology in a way that is visual. It was really important in the early church because a lot of people were illiterate, and so icons were a kind of Bible for them. The First Ecumenical Council debated back and forth about whether Jesus was divine, human, what sort of mixture, and the conclusion was he was both divine and human. And in an icon, both forms are portrayed, the divine Jesus and the human Jesus. And so it's really important that you can recognize real features in an icon. So for example, there was an icon, a traditional icon done of Saint Nicholas in Turkey, a really, really early icon, and the image of his face. And then relatively recently, they found his body, and they did one of those DNA analyses, and then did a composite of what he might have looked like. And it was amazingly similar to the icon that had been painted of him, which showed that there was a strong historical connection, that when they did an icon of a holy person, they also wanted to reflect who he was originally. In the 8th and 9th centuries, as you perhaps know, there was a huge controversy in the Eastern Church, especially the iconoclastic controversy, when it was decided that images were blasphemous and many icons were destroyed during that time. It was probably partly because Islam was really coming into world consciousness there, and so the Christians said, well, we're not supposed to make graven images, and so maybe the Muslims are right. And eventually, and it was a long sort of tortured conflict, but eventually it was affirmed by the church, the Eastern Church, that icons are not idols, but they're affirmations of the incarnation. Because Christ took on visible flesh, he can be depicted. So Byzantine iconography, so the Byzantine Empire, the Greek church, so after Rome declined in about the 4th century, Constantinople became the new Rome, became the seat of the Byzantine Empire, and that's where iconography really flourished. And that's why iconography is really associated with the Eastern Church, because Orthodoxy spread from the Greek-speaking lands up to Russia, to the Baltics, etc. So one of the things I found fascinating, that there has been a revival of interest in iconography, and a big reason is because of technology. So in the early 20th century, people figured out how to get the varnish off of old icons. So every icon has to have some kind of something on it, because people kiss them, in Orthodox churches. And so you can't just have them kissing, the paint, or it's going to come off. So they would put some kind of linseed oil or some kind of varnish. And as a result, many old icons were super dark, almost impenetrable. But they finally found out methods of stripping off those layers, and suddenly these ancient icons came to life again. And so that was part of the revival of interest in iconography. So Merrick told a wonderful story about his teacher, who, I'm blanking on her name, but I have it written down here somewhere, who he said looked like Granny Clampett, if you remember the Beverly Hillbillies. She had been a scientist in the Soviet Union, a physicist, but she was also a member of an underground church. So there was the official church that had a lot of KGB members, and then there was an underground church, and she was a member of the underground church. And her spiritual director said, I think you need to learn how to paint icons, because you're smart, and this is something that's being lost. And so as a scientist, she learned how to paint icons at a time when, and I want to make sure I get this quote right, it was part of Soviet law that it was illegal to possess handguns, pornography, and icons. That's how subversive. And so it was a real act of courage for her to learn how to paint icons. And the education of an iconographer is long and involved, and Merrick said that there's no ceiling. There's no time when you can say you have learned everything. There are different styles of icons. There's generally a Russian style. There's generally a Greek style. Most iconographers are lost to history. They're anonymous. We do know of a few. Going way back, Rublev is the most famous. And so when you learn how to do an icon, you, in a sense, are copying a prototype. And I think that gets to, I've studied enough about art to sort of realize, that's a different way of looking at an artistic work. You don't want to take liberties with an icon, because this is, if we're following a pattern that is centuries old, there are deep reasons why it was created like it was. Now, there are some artistic decisions, there's, with, in terms of shades of color and things like that, but in some ways, he said, you might think of it as paint by numbers, but it's not, because it's very much meant to be a contemplative experience for the person who creates the icon, as well as the person who meditates on the icon. And I'll talk a lot more about how we talked about how you pray as you're painting, and the ways in which you really are, when you're painting, trying to create a relationship with the figure that you're painting. And so he started out his lecture by saying, why should we paint icons? He said, we paint icons so we can save our souls. And that was really beautiful, I thought.
Before you go off that one, I can't tell, what is that thing in the right side coming out of the chest? That thing, no, the red thing, yeah, what is that?
Oh, that is, I think that's Mary. Oh no, it's a woman. It's a figure of a woman.
I can't tell.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's hard to see. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
It's very similar to that one on the
Yeah.
wall, as the colors are similar too.
Right. Right. Well, there are traditional ways of depicting people. So Mary, in the Orthodox tradition, is almost always in red. In the Catholic tradition, she's almost always blue. The whole idea of an icon is that it's meant to portray divine light. And that's why you have gold on icons. That they call it the uncreated light. And by that they mean that, so the sun is created, a light bulb is created, etc. But the uncreated light is the divine light that comes forth from the icon, from the holy figure. And so gold is the best way of symbolizing that. But he said not all icons have gold. We didn't work with gold. He said we're not good enough to work with gold. But you don't have to. There are a lot of icons that don't have gold. So an icon, when you see an icon of Jesus, of Christ, it's not a picture of Jesus, it's an encounter with Jesus. And we talked a lot about that, this idea that you are in relationship with the icon. And I'm going to talk more about how people use icons in their personal life. He told a funny story about Episcopalians, actually. He was talking about the symbolism of icons, and he says Mary traditionally always has 3 stars somewhere on her figure to represent her perpetual virginity before Jesus was born, during Jesus' birth, and after Jesus' birth. And which is, doctrine of the Orthodox Church. I'm not sure about Catholic Church, but anyway, he said that, and we were just visiting at lunch, and I said I was an Episcopalian. He said, I did a presentation at an Episcopal church on icons, and I was talking about the 3 stars. And he said, as soon as I said that, someone raised their hand and said, we don't believe that. And I said, yeah, that's sort of an Episcopal crowd, I would say. And I explained how when we say the Nicene, or the Creed on Sunday mornings, I'm probably the only one who really believes the Virgin Mary stuff, and I'm saying it for the rest of you. So we talked a little bit about theological differences, but every part of an icon has meaning behind it. Merrick said that every copy of an icon reflects 3 things: the spiritual state of the world at the time, of the church at the time, and of the individual who painted it. And so those layers are put into it. So, and I think I see what he means, that you can tell general eras of iconography, say in Russia or in Serbia. You can say, oh, that's 14th century or that's 9th century or whatever. But as an example of how the times affect icons, so Catherine the Great, who was one of the rulers of Russia, when she became head of the state, she ordered that all the icons of Mary be repainted with her face. Because she could, yes, that's right. So I think that is such a funny story, as well as horrible, of course. But so you might have heard the term writing an icon, and I always thought that that was the correct way of saying it. And actually, my teacher said, you can say it either way. He said the tradition of saying writing is perhaps a little more correct in that, he said a good analogy to creating an icon is a Torah scribe writing out the letters of the Hebrew Bible, of an exact copy done with great devotion and attention to detail. And also, writing implies that this is a theological text, and that also is part of iconography. But he said it's also painting. So I wanted to talk a little bit about icons in the modern world. And so that's where that next picture comes in. So Andy Warhol grew up in a Byzantine Catholic church. He grew up surrounded by icons. It's a branch of Christianity that uses icons. And so look at this image. You can see, as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, of course, you can see the icon in there. And of course, he's playing around with, and this is not an icon, but you can see the halo, you can see that flat perspective, and the right up close perspective. So we also talked quite a bit about modern icons that are not traditional. So there is an icon painter named Robert Lenz who is really famous for having created icons of figures like Dorothy Day. Here's Thomas Merton. And we had a long discussion about why this is a bad idea. And he sort of convinced me of it. And so he gave a lot of examples of it. One example was of, I think his name is Jean Vallée, who was an associate of Thomas Merton, founder of the L'Art community, really universally respected. And after he died, there was an icon made of him. And then it came out that there was actually abuse that went on in the community that he had been at. And he said, that's why you don't create an icon of someone who has not gone through a full vetting process, because you don't want to really pollute the language of icons by showing someone who is not officially declared a saint. Someone like Thomas, what he would object to, Merrick, I think, about this image is not, this is Thomas Merton, is not the bamboo, not the, the lotus position or anything. He would object to the fact that Thomas Merton has not been declared a saint. So he has not been declared a saint. Yeah. He gave another example. He said after Dorothy Day died that Robert Lenz created an icon of her, and her daughter was very, very upset because she thought it was actually disrespectful of her mother, because it was sort of assuming that she would be declared a saint, and it was presumptuous. We gave another example. He said that a good friend of his, who is a master iconographer, when Vladimir Putin was named Time Man of the Year, Time magazine contacted him and asked if he would create an icon of Putin for the cover of Time magazine. And his friend said, no, and it was like, you really don't understand icons, do you? And so Merrick, in his own way, and he's still sort of a free-spirited artist. He's not like a doctrinaire, sort of button-down kind of person. He really did convince me that you really want to be careful with the language of icons because it is a sacred language, and it belongs to a particular tradition, and we need to treat it with care. That said, there are these differences between Orthodox icons and Catholic icons. And so there are saints in the Catholic Church that are not in the Orthodox Church, and so it's complicated, and that often difficult relationship between Russia and the rest of the Eastern European states. So, but in general terms, be very careful with icons. He also said, and I thought this was really interesting, he said that icons tend to be created or to reappear when we need them. And he gave this as an example. So this is an icon that was created in Russia in the 1800s, and it's called the icon of the inexhaustible cup. And this is an icon that has become really, really beloved in the recovery community. And you can see why. The connection between chalice and Jesus, of grace coming from the wine cup instead of addiction. And he said he's not sure how that happened, that this icon just, and now it's all over, he said, at least in the Catholic recovery community. And I was really happy to hear that. I told him my story of this icon that has my feast day on my birthday, and he's, oh yeah, he said, she found you. He wasn't surprised in the least by that story. So I talked about creating copies of icons, and that is a long, long tradition in iconography. But there are new saints that are being created. This is an Orthodox saint, Saint Olga from from Alaska. And so this is a new icon of her. The reproduction isn't the best here, but I think it's a beautiful icon. God can create beauty from complete desolation. And you can see she was Inuit, part Inuit, and so you can see the ways in which the iconography, it's still iconography, you can sort of recognize the gold, those colors are very, very traditional, her features, but it's also, she's recognizably an individual who manifests the glory of God. That's a really beautiful icon, I think. I wanted to show Dale's icon because when he came up to me and he said that he had been given this icon by Emily, right? And he was going to bring it and he couldn't get it off his wall. Clearly it wanted to stay there. And so this is Jesus the Good Shepherd. And this is a copy of an icon. Almost all the icons you see are reproductions. They're either created as a copy or they are like a photocopied reproduction. But the divine can still come through.
Are there letters in those red circles?
Yes. Traditionally, icons of Jesus always have to include, I think it's his name in Greek, the Greek letters, I think. I've forgotten that. But anyway, you'll always see letters on a traditional icon.
I see.
Yeah.
That's the Good Shepherd.
Yeah, yeah. This is actually a good, and I'll talk more about this on Wednesday, about the way the clothing is stylized there. Icons are painted dark to light, which I thought was really interesting, because I do a lot of watercolor, and it's always light to dark. But the whole idea is, the light is coming forth. The light conquers the darkness. And so you start with really solid color, and then you put in, it's called first light, second light, third light, the different layers of white, and you get progressively lighter as you do that. And so every part of the creation is a theological teaching as well. Another example of a modern iconographer, this is Aidan Hart, a traditional subject, but this is the Transfiguration, using a lot of the traditional symbols. Here's an angel You can always tell angels because they have wings. And look at the detail on the hair. The ideal of an icon, you should feel, an icon's face should be serene and beautiful. And he contrasted it, interestingly. Some of you may have seen an image called the Laughing Jesus. I think it was really popular in the 70s. And it's Jesus laughing. It's a really nice image of Jesus. But he said, imagine coming home after your mother died and you had that on the wall. So an icon, even though sometimes they can seem too solemn, they're meant to always be available to you. And when your heart is heavy and when your heart is lighter. And so we made a good argument for why icons are smaller. The lips, the mouth is often de-emphasized in icons in general because it's a symbol of sensuality. And so it's not as important as other parts of it.
Talk about the light emanating from her face and her eyes in particular.
Well, yes. So if you paint a traditional portrait, you would put a fleck of white in their eyes. It's the reflected light. And you look at any portrait, almost any portrait, it has it. In an icon, the light is from the white part of the pupil. There's no light in the center part. And the idea is that light is shining out from the saint's body or the angel's body. And so it's a subtle detail, but it's really important symbolically that the light is not from where we would see a glint of light on eyes, because that's reflected light, and this is uncreated light. Just keeping track of my time here. Okay, this is done by Merrick's teacher, who is, I have to say her name to make sure that I'm giving her credit, Xenia Pokrovsky. She ended up immigrating to the United States. She became one of the top iconographers in the United States. Her daughter is now an iconographer, and very much in the classic Russian style. You can see there are icons about everything. So it's certainly all the biblical stories have icons, but various saint stories. This is Saint George. Yeah.
Saint George, where is the dragon?
That's his lair.
Yeah. And you can see the symbolism. So there's Jesus, who has the letters above in his halo, so you know it's Jesus looking down on everything. You can see the buildings that are oddly shaped. Again, sort of, it's like reality, but it's not reality. And then I wanted to show you, this is one of Merrick's icons. So this is Saint Hildegard, who is recently declared a saint, so it's okay to picture her. And it's beautiful, I think. And I love, she was a musician, a composer, among other things. And it's a beautiful composition, I think. So that's Merrick's work.
It's so funny, every one of them has their head tilted.
Yes, and he said, and an icon that is looking straight at you actually isn't. There's always a slight turn to the side. I don't know what the reason for that is, but it's true if you look at it. And I'll show you the icon I made in just a little bit. I also wanted to talk about how icons are used. There's one icon corner, and then there's a prettier one. For me, one of the most interesting parts of the workshop were the other students. There was one other Episcopalian, and everyone else was either Orthodox or Catholic. And it was really interesting to see how they approached this discipline. There were two young Orthodox women in particular who I was really interested in. I had a lot of conversations with them. You may not be aware, but the Orthodox Church is experiencing a surge of converts right now. And we talked quite a bit about that. Anna is her name, and her father was the Orthodox priest on the Big Island of Hawaii when she was growing up. Now he's at the cathedral, the Orthodox Cathedral in Minneapolis, and she is part of a Orthodox church in New York City. And so, she's got quite a wide perspective. And she said her church in New York City is full of converts, and 90% of them are young people, which is really interesting. And I asked her about that, and she said, well, she thinks that part of it is sort of a reaction against the nihilism of a lot of the world, that there's a hunger for tradition and roots, and that it's a wonderful blessing to have, but she said it also is creating problems for churches. Their buildings are too small, they don't have enough priests. And also, it's easy for, a lot of people are learning about Orthodoxy on the internet. There's an iconographer in particular named Jonathan Pajot, who has a podcast called The Symbolic World. It talks a lot about the symbolism, mysticism of the Orthodox Church. And so it was really interesting to get her perspective. And she herself is a painter, and probably she will be on the way to becoming an iconographer herself. And in the Catholics who were there, I think that there was a real effort to reclaim part of the traditional religious art of the church that had been let go with Vatican II. So they talked about that, how a lot of the statues were stripped out of churches, and that they really want to bring back this wonderful tradition of visual arts to the Catholic Church. We talked a lot about how might you use icons in your daily life. Icons are for home use as well as in a church. If you would visit a church, you would see in an Orthodox church a big screen that would have many icons on it. But someone who really was Orthodox would also have an icon corner like this. Maybe with more icons than this. You would try to have a light source there that would be burning at least part of the time. And Anna said it's like having a family member, like it's a place in your house where you can go to say a prayer, to say, I don't know if I can do this, to say I'm really tired, to say, help me. And that it's traditionally an icon corner should be on the east wall, but she said not necessarily. And you should always have one icon in the center of the house, like the kitchen or the hearth or whatever, because you want to make sure that the divine energy is infused throughout your house. And I thought that was really a lovely, lovely idea. So a few more comments here. Oh yeah, I've got 15 minutes. Okay. So what about us as Episcopalians? I think what should we learn about icons? Well, several things. One is to have an appreciation for the richness of this tradition. This is so old. This goes back to the really early centuries of Christianity. And it is this living tradition that we intersect with a little bit, but it's there for us as well. I would also say it's not just purchasing an icon, it's living with an icon, having it be present in your life. If you want to paint an icon, of course, that also adds a level of devotion to it. I think what I like, personally, as someone who's dabbled in art, is that icons really teach us that art can be sacred work. And I think all art can be sacred, but this is so explicitly sacred, and I think you can see that come through. But this idea, I was really struck by praying as I worked at this workshop. And we were instructed to do the Jesus prayer, which is very important to Orthodoxy. So, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. Sometimes a sinner is omitted, in some parts, but that's the classic version of it. And I watched Merrick do that because, there was stuff going on and, paint being spilled and stuff like that. But every time before he picked up a paintbrush, he would. And he knew that that's what he was saying. And then he would gently lay the brush on the board and start to paint. And it was really beautiful. It was a wonderful example of how any part of life can be infused with prayer. I mean, the reason why the Jesus prayer developed was that they wanted to follow St. Paul's commandment to pray without ceasing. Well, how do you do that? You have a simple prayer that goes over and over in your mind. And after 5 days of that, I was struck by, I'd be walking across, going to watch the water, and it would just be repeating in my mind. Because you do that often enough, and it does become sort of part of you. And I could see a little bit about what the iconographers were talking about there. I do think, too, that icons, Episcopalians have always had this sort of middle way, right? And I think we can benefit from both, taking from Protestant traditions, but also taking from Catholic and Orthodox traditions. And I think that the Orthodox idea of mystery really came through to me through the week. That isn't as much present as in Catholicism. It's there in Catholicism, it's there in our tradition as well. But there is a deep sense of the mystical side of the divine present in Orthodoxy that I think comes through in that light that is pictured in icons. It's this sense of we can only know so much, and there is a mystery that we have to just participate in rather than try to understand always. And that sort of sank in as I was going through the week. There was a time when Merrick, he had been working on a larger version of our icons through the week, and like on Thursday, when he had spent hours and hours on it, the table leg gave out, and so paint went all over. The lower half of his icon was all smeared. And I was so impressed by how calm he was. It was like, all right, let's clean up. And I do think he is someone who has done his spiritual homework. But, it was a bit short-tempered. Like, one time I just couldn't get the hair right on the angel, and I was like, I think just one highlight of yellow is enough. He said, no, Lori, there has to be 2. So he could get a little testy at times, too. But I was also struck by my fellow students. There was a real calm centeredness about them. And I think that part of it was they were pretty serious students of icons, and they were taking it seriously as a spiritual discipline. And that was really inspirational to me as I went through the week. And I think it's time to reveal my icon. So, oops. And where did I put it? Oh, there it is, yeah. So I hope you will keep it in the towel because it is still drying. It's not like tacky to the touch, but it'll dry for another couple of weeks, and then I will oil it with a mixture of linseed oil and poppy seed oil. So it's St. Michael, and I had a lot of help on this, especially in the face. The initial layers of color are not that hard to do, but the detail on the face is a lot trickier. And I have this icon on our mantelpiece, following the advice of my new Orthodox friends, saying you should have an icon in the center of your house. So if you want to pass that around. Yeah. Yeah, so this is a copy of the icon, the 14th century Byzantine icon of St. Michael. Yeah. And so how did Merrick put it? You're copying an icon, but your icon is its own icon. It's not just a reproduction, it is a work of art. Absolutely. And so there isn't this sort of looking down on people who copy. among iconographers. If you are true to the tradition, you can be creative, especially if you're creating an icon for a new saint, but you also have to have this deep respect for tradition. So Bob, what haven't I said that you...
How do you cover over the fact that this is a pretty challenging picture, and Michael was a fierce angel?
Well, every saint has different moods too. Saint Michael is mentioned both in the Hebrew scriptures and in the book of Revelation. He's the head of the angels. He's the guardian against evil. He's the guides souls to heaven. He also is super important in the history of the church, especially I learned on islands. And so St. Michael is often the patron of islands, and so he's the patron of Ender's Island. Mont Saint-Michel in France is dedicated to St. Michael. Skellig Michael in Ireland is dedicated to St. Michael. And the idea is islands are sort of they're a meeting place between chaos and land. You know, it's a place where you want to have an angel protecting you. And so, yeah. Serenity.
So to me,
Yeah.
that is quite beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because we're supposed to, when we see an icon, we are supposed to be serene. You know, that's meant to be calming and peaceful. And I love the fact that so much of this is home devotion. You know, that it's Sunday morning, but then also it's, you know, it's every day when you get up, they're there. During the Soviet era, one of the things that the communists did was that they encouraged people to create red corners in their houses. And these, it would be like this, only they'd have pictures of, you know, Soviet leaders there, like Lenin and Stalin, because they realized that people, you know, they had grown up with all of this. And so what do you do when you take away their icons? Well, you know, you have secular icons. Yes?
So red corners, the only ones I ever saw were in institutions where they knew they were supposed to be. What a family might do is put pictures of deceased family members with a pretty embroidered cloth around the frame. So it was almost became more of a just remembering your deceased
Yeah.
family members who passed on.
Yeah.
I didn't see a single family put an actual red corner.
But you'd heard about them. You knew about them, that they were...
Because they were in institutions. Well,
Yeah.
there's the woman who was trying to survive the purges in the 30s in Leningrad, and whose name was Sryabina. Well, one of the famous Stalinist leaders was Sryabin, and she created a little icon corner and put Sryabin's portrait as if she, among her family pictures.
Yeah.
To imply to the neighbors that she was related to this individual. To avoid somebody trying to get her arrested.
Right. It was illegal to have icons. Yeah.
She, it was not related, but also survived the 30s.
Yeah. Well, Merrick told a couple of stories. One was, so his mother, you know, had been in Siberia. His father had been a POW, and they came to the U.S. They worked in factories the rest of their lives, and they were very, very proud of him, but also sort of puzzled, I think, you know, about how he turned out. At a certain point, the movie Sophie's Choice came out. Remember Sophie's Choice? Meryl Streep, and her choice was she had to decide which one of her children to have killed, and he took his mother to see that movie, and they came out, and there's long silence. And he said, well, you know, what did you think of it? And she said, that was it? And he said, yeah. He said, she just lost one child? I was like, whoa, that's a tough life. And he said that So Marek, this good Polish Catholic boy, starts studying with this Russian iconographer. And his family is very skeptical, especially his mother. And so eventually he has a meeting between the two of them. And his teacher, Xenia, was very deferential to his mother and very kind to her, and that made all the difference. But I think she still always thought, yeah, I don't know. And when he went to Russia, she was terrified. She thought that he was going to be captured there and that he would never come home. So Russia, Poland, Ukraine. I talked to some about the Ukrainian conflict, and yeah, a lot of need for icons. I think one of the other takeaways I had from the workshop was just that a sense for the immense sweep of Christian history, both political history, in that part of the world, but also it's really easy to think of our 20-year period or 50-year period even, but to just get this sense of how old this tradition is, our tradition is, 2,000 years, and of the martyrs and the saints and the ways in which people have tried to express these really inexpressible things. It felt like stepping into a really deep, deep, broad river. And that was really refreshing, though I came home exhausted at the same time because it had been such an intense week. So a few more questions before we...
How did you get from where you landed to the island?
I flew into Providence, Rhode Island, and then just drove an hour south, and there's a causeway that goes to the island. Yeah. I would encourage you to, and I can send out the link, Enders Island has a very active virtual community as well. They live stream their mass, but then they also have a meditation service on Wednesday nights. They have people flowing in and out of the island continuously. Artists, of course, and people on retreat, but it's very much a living spiritual community. It's just a gem. I really recommend. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, how much would it cost to commission your teacher to paint an icon for a church?
I looked online. I think about $1,500.
That's it?
Yeah. He's got a 2-year waiting list. It depends on how big it is, too. Yeah.
And how much will it cost us to have an original Lori Erickson icon?
So at the end of the workshop, I asked Marek, I said, okay, how do I continue learning about this? He said, the first thing you do is you paint this icon over again and try to do it exactly like we did it, because that will solidify what we talked. So I hope it'll turn out. Maybe I have to make another one and another one, but I do hope to give one to New Song, yeah. And maybe others. I think it's a really beautiful art form. And there's so many there are patterns that you can get. He said you really can, if there is an icon that you like, you can create the pattern yourself. I don't think I'm at that point yet, but yeah. Other questions? So I hope you look at the icons we have in a different sort of way. I would say I don't think this is an icon I think this would probably be more of a religious picture. Marek pointed out the fact that in the Catholic Church, the emphasis in religious art is often on the suffering of Jesus. In the Orthodox Church, the emphasis is always on the majesty, the power of the divine. And I had never really noticed that before. He also pointed out the differences in how we refer to Mary. In the Catholic Church, it's Our Lady or the Virgin Mary. In the Orthodox Church, it's Theotokos, the God-bearer, the Mother of God. So it's always a title of relationship. She's not independent. She's always the Mother of God. So as a huge fan of Mary, I loved all the, the references to Mary. And that's a classic icon. It's obviously a modern, I think it's John the Baptist.
No, that was the result of a contest that the National Catholic Reporter
Oh, okay. I always thought it was John the Baptist. Okay.
Model for it was a woman, which scandalized a whole lot of people.
Right,
So,
right.
no, it's just an image.
Oh, okay.
I remember when you had that in, at Old Bridge for the Tay services.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an icon.
Okay,
I mean, it was
okay.
first published in the newspaper.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. Yes.
Did you have a pre-existing relationship with Michael before you did the painting?
No, not really. No, but I feel I do now. I mean, if you spend hour after hour after hour looking at someone's face and very carefully tracing and praying while you're doing it, there's something that happens. It really does. And I think that's part of the mystical tradition of icon. So I was really happy to paint an angel first. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just on a much broader scale, I've been thinking about how the Orthodox world uses icons quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and the Roman Catholic Western world tends to focus on statuary.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder why.
Mm-hmm.
How come one disappears and gets replaced by the other?
Right.
Are they both intended to serve the same purpose?
It's actually a good question. I can't remember him referring to statues at all in the Orthodox tradition, but he actually has a side business in restoring plaster statues in Catholic churches, which he says he really likes. He said that that's how most people who are Catholic have pictured the divine. And he said that it shouldn't just be dismissed as poor art. He said that it's like that bad copy of the Our Lady of Czestochowa that he painted. You know, the point is the prayers, not so much the quality of the image. So anyway, he really likes the plaster statues. I think icons in part, they're transportable. They're pretty indestructible. Yeah, I mean, unless you take like a sword to them or something. But, you know, it's not like a statue that you have to haul around. It's very easy to have one in your home. You know, the tradition of private devotions with icons. But, yeah, not statues, certainly as much. Anything else? I hope you will come back at the end of the month. I'm going to show a lot of pictures about the different stages, and I'm going to talk some more about sort of what I learned from painting an icon and what perhaps you might take into your own just sort of ordinary lives. You know, I touched on it a little bit, this idea of praying without ceasing, I think is part of it. So, yeah, and when my icon is all done and oiled and then it has to dry some more, eventually it's going to be blessed. And I asked Mel Schlachter to bless it actually because he was the one who really talked to me a lot about icons. It's been a real interest of his for a long time. So we'll have it blessed in church. And one last thing I would say. Merrick said, at the end of the class, he said, I have sort of a conspiracy about icons, he says. I think every Christian denomination should have a sense of icons, and I think every parish should have an iconographer, and because they're such a powerful spiritual tool. And I said as I was leaving, I said, I'll be part of your conspiracy. So here I am, spreading it. So yes, thank you, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.